Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is the Philosophical Liberal. And if you've been following along, hopefully you've been following along, you know that we are in the middle of a deep exploration of the virtues. We've already had several sessions talking about why we think virtue is so important to our statement, to what freedom really entails. And this is the episode when we really connect it to our whole philosophical liberalism project and what it is that we wrote in the statement and is going to set you up for what is really going to be almost another year now of focusing on the virtues, but we'll get to that at the end. First, I'm just delighted to have on with me again today my co-founder, co-host Chris, and I think we're going to start with the statement itself and take the conversation from there.
Great, thanks, Joy. And I would just add to tonight's discussion, if anything, the banner question that animates it, since we often have a question for our episodes, is why these 11 virtues
Yes.
specifically. We're gonna, that's the meat of the conversation tonight as well. So, as we often like to do, we like to start by quoting ourselves.
Going
Just
back to the
because,
statement, that's sort of
yeah,
been the purpose of this whole project is
right, exactly.
unpacking
No,
unpacking the statement.
yeah, I'm just being a little, facetious and
Yes.
tongue-in-cheeky. But yes, as Joya mentioned, we're now deep into Article 2, and this is what we call kind of part 2 of Article 2, which is the virtues subsection in that part of our statement. So let's just start with the opening line. We say virtues. Well, actually, wait, did we want to do, are we rereading the full preamble to Article 2?
No, I think we
I
just
don't
said we
think so.
would
Yeah,
just
okay,
read.
just the virtues. Yeah, that's right. So, virtues, the life of a creator trader pursuing continuous betterment, as well as the society of freedom on which those ideals depend, require the development of important virtues, including, and then we go on into our list of 11 virtues. So, this I think sets us up for before we dive into those 11 virtues, what we're trying to say here, and a critical point that we wanted to just highlight right out the gate is, and we say it even in our statement, but it's more uh, painter's poem-esque, if you will, in the statement, and we'll just make it a little more explicit here. What we're really trying to say here when we say the life of a creator trader pursuing continuous betterment and the society of freedom on which that ideal depends. Creator trader in this context, we're really referring to, although creator trader is itself an individual and uh, social paradigm, an ideal, we're real that kind of really in this context refers more towards kind of the cultivation of your individual self, and then the society of freedom portion, the second half of that is really talking about the social here. So the point is, before we go into the virtues we think are most significant for this project here, is we're setting out or staking our claim in the ground that these virtues are critical for both your life as an individual and in a social context, in particular, in a free society context. So I'll pause there, and I'm sure you have a more eloquent way to say that, and maybe even something to add.
I'm not sure if more eloquent, but I will just point out that it's the life of a creator or trader. So that I think is getting to this idea that we're talking about the individual, and then just making the point here that by referencing again the creator trader, continuous betterment, these were some of the ways that we've thought about the ideal that we are living up to here. So we're really thinking about how does one live that ideal life as an individual, as you've pointed out, and significantly how to have a free society. And I think it's that second half that really is animating this particular list. That's what we're really going to get into next. That really was even the more important lens through which we were trying to develop this list and put forward these particular virtues.
That's right. Yeah, I think the reason we're emphasizing the both and here, we like the both and always and are great advocates of it. Also, it's gonna prove relevant in a minute here when we talk about our process for coming to the 11 virtues. But Joy is exactly right that I think the most important takeaway here, at least for our political project of philosophical liberalism and what we're all about at 1776 forward, is, and I think we even said this in past episodes, that the real purpose of this list was to the virtues that we felt were most significant for a member of a free society. And we're going to talk into what that means. But, I think this just goes back to even what is the purpose of our whole project here, or at least the morality section, which we have uh, self-consciously and self-chosenly made the meatiest and longest section of our statement. Is we talked about this in the last episode, why freedom requires virtue, um, is that in many ways the what how do we say it? The freedom requires virtue, and virtue. I wrote it down well, and I'm botching it now. Freedom requires virtue, and the virtuous person demands freedom. I think is
Yes.
the way to think about it, um, and even going beyond that, I think perhaps even unknowing at the time when we first wrote the statement, this this list, what we were trying to do here is really offer a roadmap, if you will, for people of how to live up to the demands of a free society, how to maintain and even grow a free society, to kind of our answer to the inevitable question of, okay, this is all great ideas in theory, but so what? What do I do with it? How can I actually have an impact to support and grow a free society? And rather than kind of exhorting people to go march in a protest or sign a petition or join a political party, as important as all of those discrete actions may be, um, we're not advocating that, and also not just all simply trying to regurgitate, kind of traditional or religious values and conception of virtue as well. So that's just a kind of a reiteration of what we're trying to do here and the importance of this list, why we ended up giving it so much meat in our statement.
I think you could even say that there's that question that often comes up of, if you care about freedom, what can one do? What can one person do? And this, I think, really is our answer. And you're right that it is somewhat of a profound answer, because we're not saying that what you should do is something that is even specifically political. It's this deeper work of building your character. And I think we want to make this argument that if this is what you do, if you build your character in this way, that you build these 11 virtues into who you are, if this becomes crucial to your identity, then one, you will be the kind of person who will not settle for anything less than a free society, and you will be the kind of person that can make sure that that free society really will flourish.
Excellently put. So, with that kind of intro and call to action in mind, let's refresh everybody, or if you haven't read our statement, introduce you for the first time to our list of 11 virtues, and then we'll just kind of peel back the onion, so to speak, or pull back the curtain. I think I got my
Behind the
metaphors
scenes glimpse of our
exactly of
processes.
how we came to that list of 11, and my husband will be proud because I think I got my metaphors correct for the first time in a long time. So as we said, we read that intro, and it says life of a creator trader and the society of freedom require the development of important virtues, including responsibility, curiosity, critical thinking, purpose, engagement, adaptability, integrity, effective communication, toleration, justice, and generosity. So those were our 11 that we chose. We tried to get it into 10, but we ultimately had 11. We'll tell,
And
we'll,
I love always having an extra bonus. So and I know 11 is Chris's favorite number, and
yeah.
I love 10 plus a bonus. So I'm totally on board for
Well,
10
yes, and
plus a
we
bonus.
yeah, we did ultimately agree to it, so we were fine with it. And it is still within less than a dozen,
Less than a dozen.
which Joy and I in our conversations have concluded uh, not even wholly arbitrarily that that's kind of the upper bound of acceptable kind of lists and categorizations for the human mind to be able to hold in mind. So we're still inside that number,
Yes,
but um,
just barely, but we're still there.
exactly. So we have these 11 virtues. If you go to our statement on our website, 1776 forward, you'll see we then go on to define in a very brief sentence what the essence, in our view, what the essence of each of these virtues is to us in our meaning, and what we're trying to say. We will save all of that meat and content for each upcoming session when we cover the individual virtue and dive deeper into it. But I guess let's talk about how did we come to these 11 and why, why 11, how, why these 11? What was our process here? How did we get to it? Joya, do you maybe want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, I think maybe the most important word that you said in reading our list there was this word including, because we didn't mean for this at all to be any kind of necessarily comprehensive list. We do not think this is the be all end all of the virtues that do or could be critical and important for life overall and even for just a free society looking at it through that lens. To Chris's point, we did want to keep it somewhere around 10 to 12 because in trying to offer people what we would hope be a somewhat useful roadmap for what one could do to build up this character, we wanted to keep the number somewhere in the 10 to 12 range. And then we really had to go through this process of figuring out, okay, which 10 to 12 are we going to pick? And ultimately decided on 10 to 12 that certainly in the whole of our life experience we think have been critical for our success as creator traders striving for this life of continuous betterment and striving to be individuals who would be capable and flourishing within a free society. But that said, we don't think this is the be all end all. And one of the reasons I'm even so excited we're finally having this conversation in a more public forum is I think we can finally even get feedback from others. I'm really curious to hear what other people might want to add to this list, change to this list. If you gave yourself the same parameters of trying to create something that could be a useful roadmap, 10 to 12 virtues, which would you pick? But Chris, maybe we even want to start to give some insight of how we ultimately whittled it down to these 11.
Yeah, well, before I do that, I'll just go backwards for one quick second to elaborate on a point you made, which was uh, including you're just clarifying for I think our audience what we mean by virtue. We were asked recently by a friend, what did we mean by virtues when we were talking about a related topic here? Just to recap and clarify for everybody, when we talked about morality, we kind of boiled it down in our formulation as a kind of simple, elegant formula. Morality equals values plus virtues, values being the goals one wants to achieve in life, and then virtues being the actions that you take to achieve those values.
And the habitual actions too. That was if you go back to our conversation where we referenced Aristotle, like that, that's even how
That's
my,
right.
my way of thinking of Aristotle's point is I always think of this as habits of excellence. That's how I like to
Yes.
think of what the virtues are. These are the actions that you want to make habitual. They are the habits of excellence.
Yeah, well, and I think maybe another way to say that in more layman's terms is action, I think, boils it down to the essence. These are things you do act upon, but you can also think of them as like character traits. And I think we often think of character traits as essentially a habitual action.
Yes.
So well said here. And so I guess the relevance here is one, to just help people just be clear of what we mean. And then hopefully that starts to even help you categorize conceptually in your mind, how what relates or ties responsibility, things like responsibility, curiosity, critical thinking, et cetera, together. Virtue, though, just to elaborate even further, you know, when it comes to human action, there's an innumerable number of actions people can take that can be either good or bad. We talked about this in a prior session. Virtue, though, as a concept, specifically refers to good actions. In this case, good actions that help you achieve positive life affirming values. So we're already narrowing the funnel to a subset of all the actions you could take when we talk about virtue. And then what our process did was essentially just narrow that funnel progressively further and further. And so, we put on firstly that filter of what did we think were positive life affirming habitual actions and character traits that one needs to develop themselves as the ideal of a creator trader pursuing continuous betterment. And then also, even more importantly for this project, what did we think were the positive life affirming habitual actions that one and character traits that one needed to be a member, a productive, contributing member of a free society. And so that then gave us a further filter. We started with, I guess you could say, good actions, and then it was, good actions that, kind of are most significant for these two purposes. Um, and then we kind of just whittled it down from there. And I'll just share, like, in my own process of doing this, as Joya mentioned a little bit ago, we both kind of, um, uh, I guess we both did deduced. I always, deduced
We came up with our own
we
lists.
came up with our own list, yes, based on, I think, our own lived experience. We're
Yes.
both now in the mid part of our lives and have lived at least long enough to have accumulated enough life experience and have been thinking about these issues for a big chunk of our respective lives, that we've been certainly trying to just, I think, day to day and year to year, consciously and unconsciously or subconsciously kind of forming our own lists. I know for me, I think about morality, both values and virtues in my life, and which ones animate it, often more so in that first bucket of kind of to be my own ideal as a creator trader pursuing continuous betterment. So I already had kind of a working list of some of the ones that were most important to me. I think some of those that stand out from our list of 11 definitely were things like responsibility, purpose, and integrity. Those have always been just kind of three core virtues. And values in kind of my own life. And then, we kind of had an iterative process. So we both made our lists and then we drew upon that. A lot of it, I think, drew upon our own personal experiences. And then we kind of iterated back and forth with this in particular, trying to put that lens of the social side of it, the free society requirements portion of it to further whittle it down. And we both made our own lists and then compared and contrasted and kind of debated them. I'm not sure, Joy, if you want to add additional details, but I'm hopefully
Yeah,
this
that
gives
we
people a
looked
little
for
bit of a flavor. Yeah.
we looked for the patterns of what we both had said. I know we tried to even see, in the process of trying to whittle it down, like for example, I know honesty made at least one of our lists, and I think we both would agree that that was an important virtue. But I do remember having the conversation that, well, if we have integrity, that integrity can essentially kind of subsume honesty. So some of even the formulations of things that we had were new that came out of this process precisely because we were even trying to come up with, especially ones like engagement and adaptability. I remember those words even came out of ways that we were trying to essentially combine ideas where we were somewhat on the same wavelength, and even trying to combine almost several ideas that we had, like kind of into one bigger idea that would capture it, and in that sense allow us to have a shorter and more manageable list. That was definitely there. There were things that we'd already talked about. So critical thinking and effective communication made this list because this came out of even just earlier conversations we had had about thinking about what we might want to focus on just in some of our work with 1776 forward, that those were two that had already kind of come up that we had identified as being crucial to our project of advocating for a free society. And there were some even so like, actually like my perhaps one of my favorite virtues is the one that Aristotle also named as the crown of the virtues, which is pride. But in all of my pride, I could see that even though that one is personally important to me, it might not be the most important for this particular lens of thinking about what matters most for a free society. So it's even just kind of that process of figuring out what needs to be there. And we did also try to, while we're certainly not creating a list that we think is in any way comprehensive in terms of being the be all end all, we did definitely try to grasp a wide range of the virtues to really, I think, provide an effective roadmap to
Yeah.
give, to different elements of a full life, things from across the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think, I mean, it really was a creative process in the best and most kind of archetypal way, right? In that we brought a bunch of elements that kind of that started at you might say a kind of emotional level. Sorry, my um, battery's about to die, so bear with me while I plug in here. 1 second. Um, we kind of started at a somewhat emotional level of just kind of and drawing on that personal experience of ones we just knew were always up there in the rankings of priority and higher value for us. Um, and then we went through this iterative process, combining and collaborating, and then progressively identifying consciously more and more detail what it is we're trying to say and what kind of uh, uh, formula, if you will, we're trying to construct here. And so, as Joya mentioned, that was how we successively filtered our respective lists, and refined it more and more to be more pointed at what we're trying to say here. And as she rightly noted, critical thinking and curiosity or excuse me,
Communication.
critical thinking and effective communication, those were two things that she and I have just talked a lot about in our work on 1776 Forward, in particular, because we've always felt that those were two skills, character traits, virtues that that underpin a healthy, certainly free speech culture, which to us is foundational to a free society, and which we saw as antidotes to the growing tribalism, partisan kind of divide, um, just, kind of toxic discourse that social media has certainly exacerbated and inflamed, and that is making kind of positive progress ever harder to achieve in our political culture, things like that. So that's just again one example where putting that lens of what types of virtues are important for a citizen in a free society, why we gave precedence to virtues like that.
And then I remember we had a really interesting conversation with the ones at the end where we were recognizing on the one hand the importance of justice, and as we phrase it here, of justice being that people bear responsibility essentially for the consequences of their actions, but that you needed to essentially temper justice with something like generosity and toleration. But we kind of realized that we were trying almost to try to put those into one, I remember, and then realized they actually were two separate, different, but also very important concepts. And so all three of them ultimately made the statement to really think about how we have on the one hand justice that perhaps is the harsher recognition of recognizing that people should pay for the consequences of what it is they do, but that our human nature is such that we are not infallible beings, that we are going to make mistakes, that we are all on our own journey, and that there is a really even beautiful diversity, that we're not always going to end up at the same place, that a free society allows for the maintenance of even different values and virtues, ultimately in toleration, and then just the generosity, as well as having this lens of kind of granting that magnanimity toward people.
Yeah, and I would also say there was an element here of trying to recapture and reclaim the, in my view, correct, but what others might say, just or I might say, more positive framing of some of these virtues from the kind of conventional current cultural understanding of their meaning. Justice, for example, most people in our current discourse, I mean, frankly, I feel like a lot of people don't even talk about the concept more, like justice as such. It's usually now social justice is really the kind of package deal concept that has certainly at least come from the left side of the political spectrum and dominated the discourse. But we wanted to reclaim that to say, no, justice is bearing the consequences of your actions. I think a more morally neutral way to say that, you might say, is give to each person what he or she deserves. Um, and that's neither positive nor negative.
Mm,
It's
yes.
just a different way of saying it. But then we did want to say that we're not just kind of coldly like a scale weighing indifferently guilt or innocence, good, bad, and that was where generosity was important for us to introduce. Also, because when we think about a free society and what sustains and enables people to create and trade with each other and form positive long-term relationships and even have forgiveness and overcome in a kind of secular non-religious way, overcome past mistakes, failures, differences, bad choices, that generosity is one of the core virtues or ways in which you can do that and bridge
Yes.
between the sometimes, yes, kind of harshness and absolutism of justice, the black and white, you might say, of justice with this kind of corresponding offset. And then toleration, like you said, there is definitely an element of us wanting to, again, um, on the one hand, I think we have found there can be many people in the liberty movement who take a somewhat kind of dogmatic approach. You must kind of believe all of these kind of axioms, and if you don't, then you've fallen off the path. You're not really for the cause of freedom. And we wanted to say, no, actually, we can and should welcome in our allies from all different directions and persuasions, the big tent part of philosophical liberalism, if we all are aiming at those kind of fundamental core values, life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness, but maybe just have different formulations of getting there on the one hand. But then on the other hand, wanting to, kind of uh, draw a line of distinction versus the kind of more left-wing interpretation of toleration today, which is just kind of anything goes and it's totally, kind of morally relative in terms of how you live your life. I mean, yes, in some sense, in a free society, and we're going to talk more detail about this on the toleration episode, but, yes, there is a little bit of, as Joya you just said, like everybody does need to walk their own path and choose their own path. But we're not. I guess how's the way to put it? We're not saying that we advocate anything goes. We're just saying that in a free society, people need to have the grace and space to reach their own conclusions.
Yes. Well, I just for perhaps a concrete example that a free society would have freedom of religion, and we would expect that there would be people would have religions that would never be compatible. But as long as we can agree on a few distinct principles of, for example, protecting life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness, that all of these religions can live side by side and ought to live side by side and ought to find ways to trade amongst each other and share the values that we can share, and that this is part of what it means to live in a free society and part of the joy of living in a free society. And maybe this even segues beautifully into, I know, one of the final points we wanted to make, which is that what we are trying to do here in providing this roadmap roadmap, again, is not to even give someone a prescription of the virtues that you ought to have in life. So if you've been following along with our series, you might recall that in the last episode we gave you the call to action to essentially do our process and to say, well, if you were going to try to come up with a list of the approximately 10 virtues that you think would be most important to a free society, what would that be? And I certainly want to stress that I think part of the beauty of this is that I think every individual would come up with a slightly different list. And this is to me even one of the beauties of living in a free society, a real value of diversity. And it reminds me of a friend of ours. We can call him Joe because his name is Joe, who I always think of as being very distinctive in almost organizing his life around the value and virtue of intimacy. And intimacy, of course, is not one of the virtues that made our list. I don't think it would even make my top 25 necessarily, although I certainly would agree that it is a virtue and it's something that I certainly strive to have in many of my relationships. But it's just wonderful to have a friend like Joe who's just always bringing attention back to this particular virtue. And it's wonderful that we can have our own formulations of virtues and our own way of living. And it's part of what we're hoping to even inspire with this process to help others to not just read our list and then think of it as a dogma or doctrine to follow, but to hopefully inspire all of you to kind of take on this project of constructing your own philosophy. And to Chris's point, it's not because we somehow think that there is a anything goes subjectivism. We were very, I think, explicit in our philosophical liberalism statement of saying these are things where we're really, putting a stake in the ground and saying these things definitely matter. There are certain boundaries, there are certain rights that you have to respect, but the process is one of allowing for the maximal amount of difference and diversity within a few specific guidelines, such as you cannot kill, you cannot steal, the very specific guardrails against what you cannot do.
Yeah, I think the 2 points I would make here is that the roadmap analogy kind of stops here in that this is our list of what we thought were the 11 most significant and important ones. And certainly since this is our statement on philosophical liberalism, kind of in the full sweep of its scope, um, it's certainly we would argue we're going to argue make the case for why they're most important to us. And therefore, by extension, important for philosophical liberalism. But it isn't meant to be comprehensive or um, singular in that respect as the list of essential virtues for a free society and a creator trader pursuing continuous betterment. So in that sense, it's it's a roadmap that you still get to draw and direct in your own way. And this hopefully just even gives you a framework and a grounding for it. And then the second point to just echo and build upon what Joya you just said is this point that this is our list, but the beauty of freedom is that ultimately everybody gets to make their own list, their own philosophy for life of what values and virtues are going to animate their life and that they want to build around, and that diversity, that true diversity of character, of choices, of ideas, values, virtues, um, that is the real beauty that freedom unleashes, and that's the real toleration that we're advocating as a virtue. And that's why we are just so excited about inviting you all to join us on this journey and making your own list. And in fact, that was the assignment for last week's call to action. So we figured we would build upon that in the spirit of everyone building their own philosophy to guide them in life and their own list of values and virtues that most animate them. Presuming you all made that list, we now call on you this week to two-part pick out the one virtue within your list that you feel is most animating your life currently, And then the second part is to pick the one virtue on your list that you want or aspire to most animating your life going forward, or that at least you want to focus more of your energies and efforts around going forward.
Because I do think that that's one of the interesting things that somehow comes out when one goes through this process of trying to create the list. That there's the list of the things that you recognize that you actually do, the habits that you actually have already built into your character. And then in that list are the North Star, the goals, the aspirational virtues that you believe in, but perhaps haven't yet fully lived up to yet. So hopefully this is an exercise that gets you to recognize and celebrate both where you are and where you can go next.
Yes, exactly. And so, as always, please share your thoughts and ideas with us. You
Share
can
your virtues that you've
share your
chosen.
virtues. Yep. You can send us an email response. You can send us a DM in Substack. You can respond in line on the app and website posts. However you prefer, let us know. We'd love to hear it as we build out this list and philosophy for ourselves. We're constantly taking in new data and influences and ideas. So we want to know what we've missed as well. Until then, that is, I think, all of our time for tonight. Joya, we'll see you next time.
See you next time as we embark on it's going to be almost a
Oh,
year
yes.
long
Yes.
project now because we are going to start going through the virtues one by one and month per month. And we have 11 of them. So it's going to take us 11 months to go through them all. And I think it's going to be well worth it. And hopefully, all these recent episodes have emphasized why we think the virtues are so crucial and why it's worth spending a year to think about virtuous living.
Yes, and so that's right. So just that gives a preview and an expect setting the expectations for the next months to come. And we'll just further preview for you that part of why it's going to take 11 months is because we're going to change up the format a little bit of our Substack show here going forward. It's going to be two parts. And we'll explain more of it in next week's episode, but it's going to be two parts of a slightly different format in each of the two sessions. And so we figured, given this is the media section of our statement and it contains the full roadmap, we want to make sure it's a detailed enough roadmap for you all and really do it justice, pun intended.
No pun intended.
All right. Well, see, we disagree even there. Diversity in
Exactly.
action. Good night.
Yep. See you next time.